This module will discuss the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act as it relates to the Gum Springs facility. We will review job-specific functions and the contingency plan requirements. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act is also known as Rcra. Rcra is EPA's regulatory requirement for hazardous waste. EPA requires that each person who handles hazardous waste be familiar with their job duties and responsibilities and the emergency procedures. This refresher course is intended to review these responsibilities and procedures with hazardous waste personnel so that we can reduce the potential for mistakes which might threaten human health or the environment. By dialing 777 from any facility phone, you'll be connected to the Gum Springs emergency phone. Be prepared to provide information about the emergency you are reporting. The Gum Springs facility is a Rcra hazardous waste facility. This facility is considered by EPA as a large quantity generator and is also a treatment, storage, and disposal facility, or TSDF. Because this facility falls into these categories, it is required that personnel be familiar with emergency procedures, emergency equipment, and emergency systems. This regulation for Arkansas can be found in the Arkansas Pollution Control and Ecology Commission's Regulation Number 23. Otherwise known as hazardous waste management. This includes, where applicable, procedures for using, inspecting, repairing, and replacing emergency and monitoring equipment, key parameters for automatic waste cut feed-off systems, for example, SPL feed rate, liquid feed rate, kiln draft, afterburner exit temperatures. The communications and alarm systems, how to respond to fires and explosions, how to respond to groundwater contamination incidents, and operation shutdown procedures. A contingency plan must be developed, implemented, and maintained by the owners and operators of hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. A contingency plan is designed to minimize the hazards to human health or the environment from unexpected emergencies, such as fires, explosions, or any sudden or non-sudden release of hazardous waste or constituents into the air, soil, and surface water. In the event of an emergency, the provisions of the contingency plan must be carried out immediately. This facility has an emergency response trailer with equipment in case of such emergencies. The trailer is pictured in the lower right of this screen. For a copy of the Gum Springs contingency plan, contact the Environmental Department. For the Emergency Contingency and Preparedness Plan, our scope of the plan covers the following: general Gum Springs plant, treatment facility, and landfill descriptions, and typical operations. The Gum Springs plant facility and landfill emergency personnel, including their names, home address, telephone numbers where they can be reached on a 24-hour basis, and their job responsibilities. It lists the prearranged agreements that have been made with local police, fire, hospital and ambulance services, and other state and local emergency response agencies. Actions that the Gum Springs plant must take in response to an on-site emergency involving hazardous waste are outlined in this plan. The location of all emergency equipment within the Gum Springs plant and landfill, a Gum Springs plant treatment facility and landfill evacuation plan. There are post-emergency procedures that must be taken. These are listed in the plan as well. How to conduct incident reporting and reporting forms. Review and amendment procedures for the plan. The next few slides, we will be conducting a review of some of the Rcra or hazardous waste job-specific functions. We will be discussing the use and management of containers. Regulation 23 of APC and E have specific requirements for the use and management of containers. So what is a container? Regulation 23 defines a container as a portable device in which a material is stored, transported, treated, disposed of, or otherwise handled. Handled in this definition means it can be moved from point A to point B. Examples of containers at the Gum Springs plant are totes, SPL shipping boxes, clinker floor sweep boxes, buckets, drums, satellite accumulation containers, rail tankers, dust box, and vac trucks. In order to use a container for hazardous waste, the container must be in good condition. Good condition means that it does not have severe rusting or apparent structural defects. Structural defects would be like the ribs of the container being dented in. This would not be allowed. And the container should not leak. If the container is not in good condition, the owner-operator must transfer the hazardous waste from the managed container to one that is in good condition, or manage the container in such a way that it complies with the requirements, such as place the container in an overpack or oversized container that will contain the hazardous waste until it can safely be transferred to a container that is in good condition. The management of containers require that any container holding hazardous waste must always be closed during storage, except when it is necessary to add or remove waste. This means that lids must be tightened, bungs must be screwed in, not just set in. The rings must be placed correctly over the drum lids and bolted shut. Containers must be spill-proof. A container holding hazardous waste must not be opened, handled, or stored in a manner in which it may rupture the container or cause it to leak. Examples would be to leave a few inches in drums to allow for breathing. Do not store containers in temperatures that would cause the container to expand. Never store materials in a container that is not compatible. As for totes, all totes must be covered except when being filled or emptied. Use the proper size cover for totes. They need to be able to fit snug on them. Replace any torn tote covers. These can be found in the storeroom. Keep proper spacing in between totes so that all sides allow unobstructed movement of personnel, about 2 or 3 feet. Regulation 23 states that the owner or operator must maintain aisle space to allow the unobstructed movement of personnel, fire protection equipment, spill control equipment, and decontamination equipment to any area of the facility operation in an emergency. Keep the area cleaned up from under and around the totes. This will allow us to tell if a tote is leaking. The container integrity must be assessed prior to filling to assure that there is no spillage. Store totes in appropriate location. There are separate storage areas for empty totes and full totes. Make sure that they're stored in the area appropriately. Recycle metal totes, corrugated sides, should not be utilized as hazardous waste totes. When placing a tote in empty storage, remember to remove the magnetic label and keep the cover in place. When placing the tote from the empty storage back into the process area, make sure it has the appropriate hazardous waste label, accumulation start date, and a cover. Look at the two pictures on this screen. Can you pick out what is correct, what is not correct? The picture on the left has a tarp that fits the container. This is good. The picture on the right, the tarp does not fit. It's not on there correctly. It doesn't fit firm on the container. The picture on the left has a hazardous waste label. Again, this is good. The picture on the right, you will notice, has two hazardous waste labels. It should only have one label on it to identify what is in the tote. Having multiple labels can cause confusion about what the contents of the tote are. This is a picture of containers being spaced appropriately. This allows the operator to conduct inspections and ensure that the containers are in good condition and that there are no leaking containers. By having proper spacing, a damaged container may be spotted before it becomes an emergency. This is a picture of a nice clean storage area with all containers in their proper place. The direct burn area has specific work instructions for the high wastewater. Specific instructions are included for the tanker truck hookup, liquid rail car hookup, and for secondary containment pumping. Remember, always wear the appropriate PPE in this area. Notify your supervisor immediately if you find a leak in this area. When working in the high water waste or HWW tank farm, follow the standard operating procedures or SOPs for the tank farm. Specific operating procedures are available for truck unload, rail tanker unload, storage tank operation, in day tank, etc. If you need help finding these procedures, get with your supervisor or the environmental department. This is a picture of the tanker truck unloading area. Please take a moment to review. This is a picture of the tank farm. Please take a moment to review. What is a satellite accumulation area or satellite containers? Well, a satellite accumulation area is an area in which hazardous waste is accumulated prior to being moved to a storage or final processing area. In order to accumulate hazardous waste, the container must be in good condition. Containers must be compatible with waste being accumulated in them. Containers must be kept closed except when adding or removing waste, and the container must be marked with the words hazardous waste and descriptive words such as pot liner or contaminated PPE, etc. The container must be located at or near the point that the waste is generated. The container must be under the control of the operator whose process generates the waste. Once there is 55 gallons of waste accumulated, the date must be added to the label and the containers must be moved within 3 days to the 90-day storage area or the final processing area, if processed on site. Here are pictures taken of some satellite accumulation containers. Look at the one on the lower left. This is a drum where aerosol cans are processed. Would you consider this container to be closed? Look closely. You will see the area where the aerosol container would go in. The lid is in the open position. This would be a violation as it does not meet the closed container rule. Now look at the picture in the middle of the screen. This container appears to be closed, but we must ensure that it is bolted down so that the lid is not easily removable or can be knocked off. Now let's look at the picture in the top right. What do you think about this container? First, as in the last picture, we must make sure that the lid is bolted down securely. Secondly, the container has been overfilled. You can see hazardous waste or the contaminated gloves coming over the side of the container. This would be considered a violation as there is spillage coming from the container. Ensure that hazardous waste containers are not overfilled. The clinker floor sweep containers and dust boxes. These containers must be closed during storage except when it is necessary to add or remove waste. Again, containers must be in good condition. There should be no obvious or structural damage and no spillage. And end gates properly closed or dust loading ports closed. Cleaned up spill material around boxes on floor or around roller guides in a timely manner. Decontamination or sweep dust boxes prior to placement in the bay. Do not store full containers over drain at container storage pads. And the containers must be labeled with the words hazardous waste and have the accumulation start date. Please take a minute to review these pictures and determine what you would consider correct or not correct. The picture on the left does not have a cover. All containers must have a cover on them that is secure and in place. The container on the left should be cleaned. This container is very dirty. It has spillage or collected of hazardous waste on the outside of it. So this container should be cleaned before it is moved. The container on the left does have a hazardous waste label on it. And for the picture purposes, we will assume that the information on the label is correct. The container on the right, you can see it does have a cover, but it's not secure or fastened down as it should be. And it looks as if the container may be overfilled, but it's a little hard to tell in this picture. It appears that there is a hazardous waste label on the container, and the container on the right is clean. In processing oversized materials, there are detailed work instructions. Make sure that you're only processing one container at a time. Clean the area thoroughly when work is complete, including decontamination of the muncher. Manage totes or containers, whether they're empty or full, to the appropriate storage areas with the appropriate label, dates, and covers. Mobile equipment and decontamination areas. These areas should be washed, sweep the floors daily as needed to eliminate opportunity for tracking material outside the area. Maintain solids trap associated with sump so that it works properly. Keep it cleaned out as needed. Sumps in these areas should be pumped down at least once every 90 days. Facilitators need to log on inspection forms when this is done for tracking documentation purposes. In Area 50, keep containment room door closed when no mobile equipment in the operating room. In Area 20, keep picked metal processed in this area. Do not let it accumulate on the metal pad. Decontamination of equipment. All equipment, process, mobile, etc., should be decontaminated before leaving a contaminated area. This includes equipment to be placed in storage, equipment to be disposed of, or equipment going to the maintenance shop or out of the plant for repair or PM. Be aware of traffic patterns in the plant when leaving contaminated area. Take the time to decontaminate equipment properly. Utilization of engineering controls must be used in order to keep hazardous waste inside and not emitted into the atmosphere or environment. In order to do this, we must keep all doors and ventilators closed when the process area is active. Keep Area 50 decontamination room door closed when not in use. The overhead doors west of CV16. Burner floor doors, cooler floor doors, kiln feed indoors, gallery windows indoors. Keep roll-up doors down when the alternative solids area is operating or has waste in the tank. Owners and operators of containment buildings have specific regulations according to Regulation 23. They must use controls and practices to ensure containment of hazardous waste within the unit and at a minimum. Maintain primary barrier to be free of significant cracks, gaps, corrosion, or other deterioration that could cause hazardous waste to be released from primary barrier. Maintain the level of stored, treated hazardous waste within the containment walls of the unit so that the height of any containment wall is not exceeded. This is a view of the containment building. This room can get very dusty and cause visual restrictions. Make sure that spacing is maintained from the waste pile to the walls. In the containment building, take measures to prevent the tracking of hazardous waste out of the unit by personnel or by equipment used in handling the waste. An area must be designed to decontaminate equipment, and any rinsate must be collected and properly managed. Take measures to control any fugitive dust emissions such that any openings exhibit no visual emissions. Universal waste or hazardous waste that have been separated in the regulations to provide less stringent regulations for them. The intent is to reduce the burden of management and allow longer accumulation times for economic reasons in hopes that these waste streams will be recycled and reduce the amount of waste going to non-hazardous solid waste management systems. Universal waste consists of the following: used batteries, used lamps that are intact, which means the lamps are not broken, and mercury-containing devices. Such devices are thermostats or instruments that have free-flowing mercury in them. Used lamps may be considered as universal waste if they are not broken. They must be managed by the Gum Springs plant in the proper satellite accumulation container for the appropriate type of lamp. As with hazardous waste, the container holding the lamps must remain closed except when adding or removing lamps. This means that corrugated boxes must be sealed in some manner, or cylinder-type containers must have lids on them and securely closed. If the lamps are broken, they are then considered to be hazardous waste and must be treated as such. They would be taken to the satellite accumulation area and accumulated in the hazardous waste containers in the maintenance area. When the satellite accumulation container becomes full, it must be transferred to the appropriate storage location at the old firehouse, Building 13, and the environmental department must be notified. All batteries at the Gum Spring facilities are considered to be universal waste. This includes the NiCad batteries. The Gum Springs plant electricians are to completely discharge these batteries, tape over the contacts, place out-of-service dates on the unit, and forward to the environmental department. Lead-acid batteries should be non-spillable, accumulated in drums located at the auto shop. Electricians are to discharge these type batteries, tape the contacts, place out-of-service dates on the unit, and record on a log. Alkaline and lithium batteries are accumulated in the environmental department. Remember, do not throw any batteries in the trash. This is a picture of the universal waste satellite accumulation area for lamps. You will notice that each cylinder container is closed and has a label. The labels should be marked universal waste labels and should be marked as universal waste lamps or waste lamps. The drums in the 3 containers on the left are not the accumulation containers. The cardboard cylinders are the containers. The drums are there for stabilization purposes. In disposing of ballast, they will be managed according to PCB management recommendations. We will need to make a determination as to whether the ballast contains PCBs by the date of manufacture or wording label on the ballast. Ballast labeled either no PCBs or will have a manufacture date after July 1, 1998, are not subject to Toxic Substitute Control Act, or TSCA. All other ballast should be assumed to contain PCBs and be managed as such. Contact the Gum Springs Plant Environmental Department for proper storage and disposal of ballast. A used oil generator is any person by site whose act or process produces used oil or whose act first causes used oil to become subject to the regulation. Containers used to store used oil at generator facilities must be in good condition, which means no severe rusting, apparent structural defects, or deterioration. The Gum Springs plant manages used oil in 55-gallon closed-head drums. These containers should not be leaking. The containers must be clearly labeled or marked with the words used oil. Also, place the Gum Springs plant location that oil was generated on that label. The Gum Springs plant storage area for used oil is in the old fire station, Building 13, and auto shop. Oily water totes at kiln piers. We need to keep the containers on secondary containment pallets. Keep the tops of the containers free of spilled oil and saturated oil absorbent. Notify the Gum Springs plant environmental department when secondary containment pallets have no more room for storage containers. Examine, inspect containers before using to make sure that it is fit for use. This is a picture of the used oil area. Notice that these drums are sitting on containment pallets. Containment is required for used oil. If all containment pallets are full, contact the environmental department for assistance. Release prevention control and countermeasure plans are designed to provide the controls and procedures necessary to minimize hazards to human health and the environment from fires, explosions, and release of toxic and hazardous substances to the air, soil, surface waters, and groundwater. This plan can be found in the Environmental Department, Control Room, Security Office, or Emergency Response Trailer. This is a list of different types of spills that can be found at the Gum Springs facility that may need to be cleaned up. They include oil, new or used, oily water, diesel fuel, gasoline, kiln residue, spent pot liner, dust from points of process, limestone, hydraulic fluid, antifreeze, leachate, high water waste, and solid waste. Fluid spills need to be stopped whenever possible. Stop the leak. Turn the valve or upright the drum. Contain the spill. Use something to collect the leak or build a berm with absorbent material. Be aware of spill lockers and locations. Clean up the spill immediately. Know what level you need to contact outside help. Contact your environmental department with any spills. The Gum Springs plant has a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, or NPDES permit. This permit is the stormwater permit. This facility does monthly monitoring to include the following parameters. It's tested for oil and grease, chemical oxygen demand, and pH. In addition to this, semi-annual monitoring is conducted by the Gum Springs plant. The monitoring includes a 48-hour acute biomonitoring. This test compares the toxicity of the outfall at our facility to the Ouachita River. Thank you for taking the time to be refreshed on the Gum Springs plant Rcra hazardous waste regulations. If you have any questions on your job duties of any of the material that has been covered, please ask your supervisor or get with the environmental department.